I built my catering company from a single folding table in my garage. That was 1986, the year my husband finished his MBA and landed his first job at a wealth management firm in Austin. I was 28 years old, pregnant with our daughter, and I had $3,400 in a savings account, a borrowed commercial mixer, and a client list that consisted of exactly one person, my neighbor Linda, who needed appetizers for her church fundraiser. 35 years later, I had a fleet of refrigerated vans, a staff of 62, contracts with 4 of the largest corporate campuses in Texas, and a reputation that had taken 3 decades of 18-hour days to build. Sullivan Catering and Events. My name on the side of every van. My recipes in every kitchen, my hands in everything. So, when the call came on a Wednesday morning in March, I was standing in my walk-in refrigerator doing what I always did, checking inventory myself the way I had since the beginning, because I never fully trusted that anyone else would care the way I did. My phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I saw my attorney's name on the screen and stepped out into the kitchen. "Margaret," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The wire cleared 20 minutes ago. $6.8 million. I had to sit down. One of my prep cooks caught me by the elbow, alarmed, and I waved him off. I was fine. I was more than fine. I was standing at the end of 35 years of work, and I could finally see the other side. The buyers were a national hospitality group out of Chicago that had been circling me for 3 years. I'd turned them down twice. Not because the money wasn't right, but because I wasn't ready. A company is like a child. You don't hand it to strangers until you're sure they'll take care of it. When they came back the 3rd time with a transition plan that protected my senior staff and a number that made my attorney go quiet for a long moment, I said yes. $6.8 million. I sat on an overturned milk crate in my own kitchen, and I pressed both palms flat against my thighs, and I breathed. I thought about my daughter and her husband and their 2 boys in Nashville. I thought about the trip to Ireland my husband and I had talked about for 20 years, the one we always said we'd take when things slowed down. I thought about the lake house we'd driven past 100 times on the way to his mother's place in Marble Falls, the one with the green shutters that went up for sale last fall and that I'd looked at too long as we passed. I thought about my husband sitting in his corner office on the 14th floor of the Meridian building downtown, where he had worked as a senior partner for the past 12 years, managing other people's money with the same careful precision he brought to everything. He would be at his desk right now. He was always at his desk by 8:30. I untied my apron. I told my kitchen manager that I was leaving for the morning and that he was in charge. I got in my car. I didn't call ahead. This was not the kind of news you delivered over the phone. This was 35 years of early mornings and missed dinners and canceled vacations, and a husband who had been patient with me, who had understood that the company came first, more times than it should have, who had held things together at home when I couldn't. He deserved to hear it in person. He deserved to see my face when I told him. The drive downtown took 18 minutes. I parked in the visitor garage and took the elevator to the lobby, still in my work clothes, dark slacks, a white button-down with a small grease stain near the second button that I hadn't noticed until I was already in the elevator. I almost went back to my car to sit there until I looked more presentable. Then I thought about $6.8 million and kept walking. The receptionist on the 14th floor was a young man I'd met at the company's holiday party in December. He looked up when I came through the glass doors and smiled with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sullivan, what a nice surprise. Is he expecting you?" "No," I said. "I wanted to surprise him. Is he in?" Something moved across his face. Not alarm, exactly. More like the expression of someone calculating very quickly whether to say the next thing. Yes, he's in his office. But he has someone with him right now. A client. Yes, I can let him know you're here if you'd like. Have a seat and Don't bother, I said, already smiling, already moving. I'll just knock. Mrs. Sullivan. I was already down the hallway. His office was at the end, glass-walled on two sides overlooking the city. With wooden blinds he kept turned at an angle that let in the light without the glare. The blinds were closed. That was unusual. My husband liked the view. He talked about the view constantly. I had teased him about it for 12 years. I reached for the door handle. And then I heard it. Not words, just a sound. A low, unhurried laugh that didn't belong to my husband. A woman's laugh, easy and familiar. The way you laugh with someone when you've forgotten to perform anymore. My hand stayed on the door handle. Stop. My husband's voice, low and amused. I'm serious. Stop. You're not serious at all, the woman said. I opened the door. My husband was standing behind his desk. He was not working. He was leaning against the credenza with his jacket off and his tie loosened, and there was a woman sitting on the edge of his desk. Sitting on his desk, not in the chair across from it. And her hand was resting on his forearm in a way that told me everything in under 2 seconds. She was younger than me. Substantially. Dark hair pulled back, a fitted blazer, the kind of effortless presentation that takes considerable effort. I had seen her before. At the holiday party. At the firm's anniversary dinner the previous spring. She was a financial planner, a junior partner. I had spoken to her about her work. I had complimented her earrings. Both of them turned. My husband's face went the color of old cement. Margaret. His voice came out careful and thin. I wasn't. What are you doing here? I didn't know you were coming. I looked at her hand on his arm. She pulled it back slowly as though moving quickly would confirm something. It was already confirmed. I looked at my husband's face. I looked at the closed blinds. I looked at the jacket on the chair and the loosened tie and 35 years of mornings making his coffee and covering for him at school events, and choosing the company over vacation so that we could have a retirement worth something. And I said, very quietly, I'm so sorry. I can see you're in the middle of something. I'll come back. I turned around and I walked back down the hallway. I heard him say my name twice behind me. I did not stop. I smiled at the receptionist, who was watching me with an expression I recognized as guilt, and I pressed the elevator button and I stared at the doors until they opened. I rode down 14 floors. I walked through the lobby, out the glass doors, across the parking structure to my car. I got in. I closed the door. I put both hands on the steering wheel. I did not cry. I don't know why exactly. I think part of me had been waiting for this for a long time without knowing what I was waiting for. The late evenings that stopped needing explanation because I stopped asking. The weekend conference in Denver 18 months ago that I'd said nothing about even though the firm's website showed no conference that weekend. The way he had started closing his laptop when I walked into the room, a gesture so small that I'd filed it away as nothing and moved on. I had moved on from a lot of things. I was good at moving on. I had a company to run. I sat in the parking garage for 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard without seeing it until the number changed from 10:47 to 11,001. Then I called my attorney. Not to tell him about what I'd just seen. I called him about something else entirely. Before we close out everything on the business sale, I said, I want to ask you something. The money from the sale, given that I started the company before I married, with my own savings, and his name was never on any of the business documents, where does that put us, legally, if there were ever a divorce? There was a pause. Margaret, is everything all right? Just answer the question. He answered the question. Texas is a community property state, which meant assets acquired during marriage were generally split equally. But a business started before the marriage with separate funds, maintained separately, with no commingling of marital assets. That was a defensible separate property claim. It would not be bulletproof. My husband's attorney would argue that my ability to build the business was supported by our marriage, that his income had allowed me to take risks I couldn't have taken alone. It would be contested. But the foundation was solid. Don't do anything with the sale proceeds yet, my attorney said. Don't move money, Don't make any major financial decisions. Come in this afternoon, and let's talk." I went in that afternoon. I did not go home first. My attorney had handled my business affairs for 11 years. He was methodical and unsentimental in the way that good lawyers are, and he did not waste time on sympathy when there was strategy to be had. We sat in his conference room with the sale documents spread across the table, and he walked me through every scenario with the same flat calm he used when reviewing supplier contracts. "First thing," he said, "we document the business's history as separate property as thoroughly as possible. We already have a strong paper trail, your initial investment, the premarital startup date, the fact that he was never listed as owner or co-owner. Second, we need to look at your joint financial accounts, all of them, before you do anything else." I looked at him. "When marriages end," he said carefully, "sometimes people move money. Sometimes they've been moving money for a long time, and the other person didn't notice. I hadn't noticed. I had been too busy running a company. That evening, I did go home. My husband's car was in the driveway. I made dinner. I made his favorite, chicken piccata, the recipe I'd been making since our first apartment in 1982, the one that meant everything was fine, nothing was different, the world was still the same shape it had been this morning. He came into the kitchen while the pasta was boiling. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and he watched me for a moment. "About today," he said. "It's fine," I said. I kept my back to him. It wasn't what it looked like. The pasta water was starting to boil. I turned down the heat. "Okay, her name is Jennifer. We've been working closely on a client portfolio. We've gotten close. I won't pretend otherwise, but it's fine," I said. I turned around and I looked at him. He was 63 years old and he looked tired, and I felt something close to pity before I felt anything else. I was flustered when I came in. I shouldn't have dropped by without calling. My fault. He looked at me for a long moment, trying to read something. I had spent 35 years running a business, which meant I had spent 35 years learning to show people exactly what I chose to show them and nothing more. "What did you come by to tell me?" he asked. "Nothing important," I said. "Just had a free morning. Thought I'd say hello." He looked relieved. He should not have looked relieved. He said dinner smelled great. I said thank you. We ate at the kitchen table, and he talked about a client situation at work. And I listened and I smiled in the right places. And when he helped clear the dishes, I thanked him for that too. That night, after he was asleep, I sat at the desk in the small room I used as a home office, and I logged into our joint investment accounts for the first time in over a year. My husband managed our personal finances. He was, after all, a financial professional. I had trusted him completely. It took me 40 minutes to understand what I was looking at. Transfers, regular, unremarkable-looking transfers to an account I did not recognize, going back over 2 years. Nothing enormous, 2,000 here, 4,000 there, but steady, rhythmic, like a slow leak in a wall you don't notice until the damage is structural. In 2 years, the total was just over $86,000. I photographed every screen with my phone. Then I closed the laptop and I went back to bed. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I had never expected to be. Methodical, patient, strategic in a way that felt entirely foreign to who I thought I was and entirely natural to what the situation required. My attorney connected me with a forensic accountant who specialized in divorce cases. She was 60 herself, compact and brisk, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She reviewed everything I'd photographed and did not blink. She told me the transfers appeared to be going to a brokerage account opened in my husband's name alone. She told me she needed 2 weeks to trace where the money had gone from there. She got back to me in 10 days. The money had gone, in substantial part, toward the lease on a condominium in the Domain area of Austin. A condominium in which my husband was not listed as a resident, but which he paid for, reliably every month, for the past 22 months. I hired a private investigator the following morning. He was a former Travis County Sheriff's deputy, quiet and professional, and he told me, seen everything. He gave me a small audio recorder and explained, without being asked, that Texas was a one-party consent state. Everything he gathered would be legally admissible. I went home and I cooked dinner, and I was a good wife. My husband had no idea. The investigator took 11 days. What he produced was thorough and inarguable. Photographs, time-stamped and geotagged, of my husband entering and leaving that condominium at hours that had nothing to do with client meetings. Photographs of him and Jennifer at restaurants I had never been to and had never known he frequented. A record of cash withdrawals that corresponded to the kinds of expenses that don't leave receipts when you don't want them to. A separate credit card in his name alone that I had not known existed. The condominium lease. 22 months. I thought about the trip to Ireland. I thought about how many times I had said, "Not yet," when things slow down. "We'll do it then." I thought about the green-shuttered lake house that had sold while I was renegotiating the catering contract for a tech campus in Round Rock. I thought about how carefully I had protected this marriage, how much I had built around it, how certain I had been that we wanted the same things. We did not want the same things. On the morning I had decided to act, my husband came into the kitchen in his robe and poured himself coffee and kissed my cheek and said, "I was thinking we should talk about the money from the restaurant group, the acquisition offer they floated before you decided to sell." "What was the final number?" He said it casually. He said it the way you say something you've been thinking about for a while and have been waiting for the right moment. I looked at him over my coffee cup. "Why?" I asked. "Because whatever you got for it, we should be thinking about how to manage it. Tax strategy, investment allocation. That's a significant sum and you've never dealt with anything at this scale. I can help." There it was. I thought about Jennifer's hand on his forearm. I thought about $86,000 leaving our accounts while I was checking inventory in my walk-in refrigerator. I thought about the woman who had sat on the edge of my husband's desk in the office with the closed blinds. "That's really thoughtful," I said. "Let's talk about it soon." He smiled. He refilled his coffee. He went upstairs to get ready for work. That afternoon, I filed for divorce. The grounds were fault-based, adultery. Texas allows fault-based divorce, and fault can affect property division. My attorney filed on a Thursday. My husband received the papers on Friday morning at his office. He called me 11 times between 10 a.m. and noon. I did not answer. He came home at 12:30, which he never did. I was in the living room, already packed. I had a bag by the door and my daughter on the phone. He stood in the doorway of the living room, and he looked at the bag, and he looked at me, and his face ran through several expressions, very quickly, before settling on something that was trying to look like hurt. "You can't be serious," he said. "I'm completely serious. This is about Jennifer." "Margaret, I told you it's not—" "I know about the condominium," I said. He stopped. "I know about the account the transfers went to. I know about the credit card. I know about the lease, the restaurants, the 22 months. I stood up. "I know about all of it." He sat down on the couch. Not by choice. His legs simply made the decision without him. "How long have you?" "Long enough." "The business sale," he said. And I watched the calculation happen in real time behind his eyes. "Margaret, whatever you think about us, whatever is happening between us, that money, I am your husband, I am entitled to." "Talk to my attorney," I said. I picked up my bag. "You won't get to keep it," he said. His voice had changed. The hurt was gone. What was underneath it was harder and colder and more honest. "I'll contest the sale proceeds. I've supported you for 35 years. I gave up opportunities to stay here, to keep our family stable, while you built that company. I have a claim." I thought of all the things I could have said. I thought of the late nights and the missed school plays and the family vacations I'd cut short to handle crises at work. I thought of who had actually sacrificed what. "My attorney will be in touch," I said. I went to stay with a friend in the Terrytown neighborhood, a woman I had known since our daughters were in kindergarten together, who made no judgments and kept good wine, and who sat with me in her sunroom that first evening while I said very little and she said exactly the right things, which were mostly nothing at all. What followed was not clean or easy or swift. My husband hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces, a man with a reputation for making the opposition regret not settling early. They came in hard. They argued that my ability to grow the business had been directly enabled by our marriage, that his income had provided the financial stability that allowed me to take the risks that made me successful. They argued he had sacrificed partnership opportunities at larger firms to accommodate my schedule, our family, our life here. They submitted affidavits from colleagues attesting to his professional contributions to our household. My attorney presented the paper trail of the separate property, the startup date, my premarital savings account that had seeded the initial investment, the continuous unbroken chain of sole ownership through 35 years of business documents, every tax return with only my name, every loan I'd taken in my name alone. Then my forensic accountant presented the transfers. $86,000 removed from marital accounts, the condominium, the hidden credit card, the paper trail that told a story my husband's attorney had not anticipated we had. There was a recess. When we reconvened, the tone in the room had changed substantially. The settlement took 4 months to finalize. The sale proceeds from my company were classified as separate property. My husband received his retirement accounts, his partnership share in the firm, and half the proceeds from the sale of our house. I received the other half of the house proceeds, my retirement savings, and the business sale funds, minus the taxes already set aside. He also repaid, as part of the settlement, the $86,000 to my share of the marital estate. Jennifer, I learned through a source I won't specify, had quietly resigned from the firm 2 months into the proceedings. Apparently, the situation had become professionally untenable. I was not surprised. There is a significant difference between the excitement of a secret and the tedium of its consequences. The divorce was final on a Tuesday in November. My attorney called me with the same voice he'd used 8 months earlier. Measured, professional, with a smile underneath. I was sitting in my friend's sunroom again when he called, watching the sun come down over the lake. I was 61 years old. Single for the first time since I was 26, wealthier than I had ever imagined. My daughter had been my constant through all of it. She had cried on the phone the first night, the kind of crying that is really anger wearing grief's clothes. And then she had organized herself the way she always does, methodically, practically, and had become my fiercest advocate. She had not spoken to her father in 4 months. That was her choice, not mine. I told her that whatever happened between them was between them, that I was not asking her to take sides, and that I would be all right regardless. She didn't entirely believe the last part. She was right not to. I was all right anyway. With the money came a weight I hadn't expected. $6.8 million is not the kind of sum you simply put somewhere and forget. I spent the first month after the divorce doing very little except walking and reading and sleeping more than I had in years, and thinking carefully about what I actually wanted. I found a financial advisor, my own, nobody's recommendation but mine, a woman who ran a small firm in Dallas that specialized in women navigating sudden wealth after divorce or widowhood. She was 64 and direct, and had seen every iteration of the story I was living. We met 3 times before I trusted her enough to share everything. Together we built a plan. Half the money went into a diversified portfolio, conservative and boring by design, because I had spent 35 years taking risks and I was ready to be boring. A portion went into a real estate trust that my advisor managed. I kept enough liquid that I would never have to make a decision out of financial urgency for the rest of my life. And then I did something I had been thinking about for longer than I could clearly remember. I had started my career doing food for one person. I had spent 35 years doing it for corporations. What I had never done was what I had originally wanted to do when I was young and had nothing but the borrowed mixer and the dream, feeding people who needed to be fed, not as charity. As infrastructure, as respect, I established a program through a culinary nonprofit in Austin that I'd worked with informally for years. We trained women who had been out of the workforce, due divorce, due incarceration, due poverty, to work in professional kitchens. We paid them during training, we placed them, we followed up. I named it after my mother, who had cooked for every family on her street during the bad years when no one could afford to feed their own. My daughter joined the board. Her older son, who was 9, told her he wanted to work there when he grew up. I think he meant it. I went to Ireland, alone because I wanted to and because it was better that way. I spent 3 weeks in County Clare with a rental car and no plan, driving on the wrong side of the road and eating soda bread and standing at the edge of cliffs watching the Atlantic do what it had been doing for a great deal longer than I had been watching it. I thought about my husband very little. When I did think about him, I found I felt something close to indifference, with a thin layer of sadness underneath it, not for what I had lost, but for what I now understood had not existed in the way I had believed it did. That was its own kind of grief. I let it be what it was. I bought the lake house with the green shutters. It had come back on the market in September. I drove out to Marble Falls on a Friday afternoon and stood in the empty kitchen looking at the view of the water, and I called my daughter and said I was going to make an offer. "Mom," she said, "just buy it. Stop asking permission." She was right. I bought it. My first weekend there, I drove to the small town nearby and bought groceries and cooked for myself in the new kitchen for the first time, and ate on the back porch while the light went down over the water. It was completely quiet, except for the lake sounds. I had spent 35 years in noise, kitchen noise, business noise, the constant productive roar of something being built. I had not known that I was also capable of this. The following spring, my daughter came with the boys for a week. We kayaked in the mornings and cooked together in the evenings, and the boys slept on air mattresses in the second bedroom and were the loudest people I had ever been happy to have in my house. My older grandson asked me how much the kayaks cost. I told him more than he had in his piggy bank, but less than he'd make if he worked hard. He found that satisfying. On the last evening, after the boys were asleep, my daughter and I sat on the back porch with wine and the lake in front of us. "Are you okay?" she asked. She asked me this regularly. It was her way of keeping track. I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned to do things since the company sold. Honestly and without efficiency, without moving on before the answer was actually ready. "Yes," I said. "I really am." "Dad called me last week." "I know. He texted me to let me know he was going to." She was quiet for a moment. "He's seeing someone." I assumed. He wanted me to know that he regrets how things went. His words. I looked at the water. A heron was standing at the edge of the dock, absolutely still, doing what herons do. "That's between you and him," I said. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I don't feel sorry for him." "You don't have to feel sorry for him. You also don't have to punish him forever. He's your father." She looked at me the way she had looked at me since she was small, the way that meant she was deciding whether I was being noble or genuinely at peace. "You've changed," she said. "I had 35 years of building something," I said. "I think I was due for a change." The heron lifted off the dock without warning and was gone across the water in a direction I couldn't follow in the dark. I had started the catering company with a folding table and a borrowed mixer and no particular certainty that it would amount to anything. I had built it on work and stubbornness and a refusal to accept what other people said was possible for a woman running a kitchen in Texas in 1986. I had made it worth $6.8 million, which was, my attorney had said, in a rare moment of warmth, not bad for a folding table. The marriage had cost me things I was still in the process of understanding. The betrayal, the quiet theft from our accounts, the years I had looked away from things I must have sensed without letting myself know. Those were losses, and they were real. And I was not going to pretend otherwise. But the marriage had also given me my daughter. It had given me the years of building something in a city I had come to love. It had given me the knowledge, hard-earned and useful, of exactly what I was made of when things fell apart. At 61, I had the lake house and the program my mother's name was on, and a passport with an Irish entry stamp, and a daughter who called me every other day, and 2 grandsons who are currently asleep in my spare room, making the kind of noise that boys make even when they're unconscious. I had all the time in the world, and I had finally learned, 35 years later than I should have, that the folding table had always been mine.